Multiple devices එකවර connect කළ හැකි. Internet like a boss. SLT Mobitel Fiber. Multiple devices එකවර connect කළ හැකි. Internet like a boss. SLT Mobitel Fiber.
Road to stability. Sri Lankan authorities make significant progress in line with the economic reform program, says visiting IMF team as they conclude visit in Colombo. En route, Litro secures domestic LPG gas supplies for 4 months with World Bank assistance.
The third cargo will be between 15th and 17th. There will be a ship coming by 20th. And then thereafter 22nd, there will be an arranged cargo. And then 25th and 27th as well as 29th.
Permanent. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa reappoints Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe as CBSL governor for 6 years. Priorities. Country representative of the United Nations Food and Agriculture Programme emphasizes aid must be provided to most vulnerable during Sri Lanka's dire situation.
Children will be extremely hard hit. Pregnant and lactating mothers will be extremely hard hit. A third of pregnant and breastfeeding mothers in this country anyways are anemic.
All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9, this Thursday the 30th of June 2022.
නව ලයිෆ් බොයි කොහොම ස්වභාවික කොහොම සාරයෙන් සමග හානිකර පැරබන් රහිතයි.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
A very warm welcome. Good evening to AdaDerana 24's English News. I'm Andrew Bernard. Now with your top stories for tonight, state-owned gas supplier Litro Gas Lanka Limited successfully procured a 100,000 metric ton consignment to supply gas for 4 months to the country today. Speaking to AdaDerana English News, Litro Gas chairman Mudita Piris said that the first 2 cargoes of consignments are expected to arrive on the 6th and 10th of July. He also said that more LPG consignments will arrive in the country between the 15th and 29th of July that will provide relief to consumers affected from the island-wide gas shortage. During the past few months, Litro Gas Lanka Limited has faced difficulty in providing an uninterrupted gas supply to the market due to the dearth of foreign reserves in the country. With that being the case, long queues were formed near the Litro Gas outlet for days to secure a gas cylinder to fulfill their cooking needs. While there is a serious need for a continuous gas supply to the country, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe recently stated that a consignment of 100,000 metric tons of LPG will be imported to the country by paying $90 million. That includes $70 million secured from the World Bank and $20 million from the state treasury. Today, the state gas supplier successfully procured the 100,000 metric ton LPG consignment from the Oman gas supplier as chairman of Litro Gas Lanka Limited, Mudita Piris, signed a World Bank funded agreement with the supplier, guaranteeing continuous supply to Sri Lanka. This consignment is said to be enough to supply LPG to the country for 4 months. According to the Prime Minister's media division, 70% of the consignment will be provided to domestic consumers, while the remaining 30% will be provided for commercial use. An estimated 5 million 12.5 kilogram cylinders, 1 million 5 kilogram cylinders, and 1 million 2.5 kilogram cylinders are expected to be filled from this consignment. An initial consignment of 33,000 metric tons of LPG from the 100,000 metric ton shipment procured at a cost of $20 million are expected to reach Sri Lanka next month, and distribution will commence immediately.
With all this, we have already made arrangements with the logistics with the supplier, and we have confirmed cargoes on the first cargo will be here in Colombo on the 6th evening. So probably by 7th evening, we are expecting to start the distribution immediate basis on the 7th afternoon or 7th evening. And then the second cargo will reach Colombo around 10th afternoon, I think. Both those 2 cargoes would be 3,700 metric tons each. And then the third cargo will be between 15th and 17th. It will be again another 3,200 metric tons. And then thereafter there will be another one on 20th. where the supplier is supposed to bring down a bigger floater, bigger vessel, which carries about 20,000 odd metric tons, will be parked at the Maldivian waters between 10th and 15th. So after the logistics arrangement, there will be a ship coming out of that cargo also by 20th, which will be again approximately about 3,500 metric tons. And then thereafter, 22nd, there will be an arranged cargo, and then 25th and 27th as well as 29th. Altogether, the expected amount of cargo is up to 33,000 for the month of July, and we are very sure that we can address these long queues.
Now, with low supplies of fuel available in the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, the government has purchased 7,500 metric tons of diesel from private supplier Lanka IOC in order to meet the needs of essential services and power generation requirements. Although state-owned Sipetco prioritized fuel distribution to essential services, the public has found relief in Lanka IOC's distribution of fuel under a token system. Lanka IOC has announced that it will begin island-wide distribution through its fueling stations starting from tomorrow. With no indication on when the general public can expect the next fuel consignment, state-run Ceylon Petroleum Corporation made an announcement on Monday that it would restrict fuel distribution to essential services and power generation needs only, as limited stocks were in possession. The country's only private sector supplier, Lanka Indian Oil Company, however, announced that it will distribute fuel across all its refilling stations, but announced a fuel rationing system for all types of light vehicles. Lanka IOC meanwhile called on all owners of fuel distribution bouncers registered with the company to report to work tomorrow, as the company plans to distribute fuel to its filling stations across the country. They are currently distributing fuel on a token system island-wide. Meanwhile, with Sipetco running low on stocks of fuel, the government decided to purchase 7,500 metric tons of fuel from the Lanka IOC for the distribution of essential services and power generation. It is reported that the necessary payments had already been made. With the prioritization of fuel distribution to essential services, there has been a marked reduction in the number of people waiting in queues at many refilling stations in Colombo and a reduction in traffic as well. However, the same could not be said to refilling stations located elsewhere, as many were seen parked at lines stretching out from refilling stations. Due to the shortage of fuel and reduced bus capacity, people were also standing for hours in expectation of public transportation. In the meantime, a few incidents of certain people attempting to steal fuel from vehicles parked on the roadside and incidents of fuel hoarding were reported. Last night, a group had attempted to steal fuel from a few heavy vehicles parked in the area of Obesekarapura. However, with people in the vicinity noticing the attempt to steal the fuel, the suspects had fled the area. Following this, area residents strung up the three-wheeler belonging to the suspects onto a light post. Elsewhere, STF personnel cracked down on a person who had hoarded 1,900 litres of diesel in the area of Girandurukote. In the meantime, after the staff at a Lanka IOC filling station in Ambalangoda informed people in the queue that it had run out of fuel stocks, the people had taken measures to call officials from the Consumer Affairs Authority to ascertain whether the claims were true. Upon inspection, it was revealed that storage tanks at the filling station had 690 litres of fuel that could be dispensed to the people. The remaining stocks were later issued to the people. Meanwhile, Minister of Power and Energy Kanchana Wijesekara, currently in Qatar, held discussions with the Qatari Minister of Commerce and Industry on possible investment opportunities in the energy and related sectors in Sri Lanka. The minister also discussed with the Qatari Minister of Labour on the current employment opportunities for Sri Lankans in Qatar and the new job opportunities that may arise with the forthcoming FIFA World Cup. Now, in the meantime, bus fares will increase by 22% from midnight tonight. With that, the minimum bus fare now will be 40 rupees, which will be applicable to both the Sri Lanka Transport Board and private bus sector buses.
On the 26th of June, both Ceylon Petroleum Corporation and the Lanka Indian Oil Company announced a hike in their fuel prices. This hike also came in a backdrop where the annual bus fare revision was expected to come into effect from 1st of July. As a result, the private bus owners demanded a considerable hike in their fares, stating that they are unable to sustain in the transportation sector with the price hikes. On Monday, they had discussions with the National Transport Commission pertaining to the matter, where they requested for a 30% increase. Following discussions the Commission had with the Ministry of Transport, the decision was made to hike the bus fares by 22%. Accordingly, the minimum bus fare of 32 rupees will be increased to 40 rupees from midnight today.
බස් ගාස්තු වැඩිවීම සාමාන්‍ය සේවා අර්ධ සුඛ උපභෝගී සේවා උපභෝගී සේවා අධිසුඛ උපභෝගී සේවා යන සියලුම සේවාවන් වලට අදාළ වෙනවා පෞද්ගලික සහ ශ්‍රී ලංකම බස් රථවලටත් මෙම බස් ගාස්තු වැඩිවීම අදාළ වෙනවා.
Meanwhile, in a media briefing today, some of the private bus owners associations raised their concerns on the fuel issue, stating that it is not yet fully sorted for them.
අපි රජයට යෝජනා කළා පෞද්ගලික බස් රථ 18 සැලැස්ම යටතේ පෞද්ගලික බස් රථවලට ප්‍රමුඛතාවය දෙන්න කියලා. නමුත් අපිට කොළඹ ඉඳන් තිරුකුණාමලයට ගිහිල්ලා එන්න පුළුවන් තරම්වත් ඩීසල් ප්‍රමාණයක් ලබා දෙන්නේ නැහැ. ඉතින් මේ ටැංකි භාගයක් දීලා අපිට මේ ගමන අවසන් කරන්න බෑ.
අපේ ආපු අලුතෙන් ආපු ප්‍රවාහන ඇමතුමා දුර ගමන් සේවා නතර කරන්න ඕනලු. බස් එකක කොළඹට එන සෙනග මගින් බැහැ නගින්න ගියොත් බස් රථයක මිනිස්සු කොච්චර
Sri Lanka's situation is serious, but the country needs to work diligently to come out of it. These remarks were made by the United Nations country representative for Sri Lanka of the Food and Agriculture Organization, Vimlendran Sharan, speaking to Indivari Amawatha at Hyde Park on AdaDerana 24. He emphasized that Sri Lanka is undergoing a very grave crisis and whereby authorities must not rely solely on numbers to deal with the crisis, but on empathy as well. The FAO representative said that help must go to the most vulnerable sections of society, such as children, expectant and lactating mothers, as 17% of the child population in the country suffers from malnutrition, while the expectant mothers and lactating mothers are anemic.
You warn of acute food crisis, and in Sri Lanka it still looks like the gravity of the situation is not understanding. But should we be frightened about this?
I think we are facing a very grave crisis and we should not underplay this situation. And my only take on this is, don't just go by numbers, because they don't give you an accurate picture. Sometimes you have to understand the pain of the person who's facing hunger, and we have to try and work for that. 193 million people in the world are facing acute malnutrition and food insecurity. Try and imagine somebody you love as part of that 193, and then you will understand how bad the situation is. The country today, Sri Lanka, sadly is facing a grave situation. The government is appraised of this. Agencies, international agencies are fully knowing what's happening, and everybody is working to help the country come out of this. Sadly for us, there are so many other hotspots which perhaps is taking some bit of attention away from Sri Lanka. Say what is happening in Syria, in Afghanistan, in Yemen, in Ukraine. So a lot of the world focus is getting divided into many arenas, and Sri Lanka has to find a place there. I would say that while we are working with international communities on all this, the country by itself also must work diligently and ensure that we come out of this situation as soon as possible. But it is serious.
What stringent measures do you think economies, and especially Sri Lanka, should implement?
There are three factors today playing in the global agriculture food scenario, which is causing us a lot of concern. One is climate change and its impact. The second is conflict around the world, which has a huge impact on food security. And the third is the macroeconomic instability. All these factors combined, when also seen in the context of 2 years of pandemic, which really disrupted the global economy, have seen to nearly 193 million people now suffering from acute malnutrition. This figure is up by nearly 40 odd million in the last 2 years. Sri Lanka is falling today in the third category, where there is a macroeconomic instability, which is causing problems in the sector. both in terms of providing inputs as also in terms of providing adequate food accessible at a reasonable price to the people to maintain a healthy and active life. And this has played out very starkly on the poor and vulnerable, including the children. We fear Sri Lanka in any case was not doing very well on the malnutrition front. You have a situation where nearly 17% of the Sri Lankan children are suffering from stunting, another 15% are suffering from wasting. In that you bring in COVID, in that you bring in this crisis, and I'm quite sure that we have gone backwards.
Does this mean children will be hard hit going further?
Absolutely. Children will be extremely hard hit. Pregnant and lactating mothers will be extremely hard hit. A third of pregnant and breastfeeding mothers in this country anyways are anemic. If you do not provide them adequate food, nutritious food, obviously that number is going to go up further. This is definitely a very, very vulnerable section of the society we are talking about. Urban poor is going to be very badly impacted. In the rural community, the farmers and the landholders who are holding very small pieces of land, say half an acre, 1 acre, these are farmers who grow for their own sustenance. They do not bring food to the market to sell. Now imagine a situation where nearly 39 or 40% of farmers who fall in this bracket are not able to grow enough for their own consumption. Obviously, all this is going to play out in a big way. So we have to be very careful when we do our planning and when we do our identification of beneficiaries and targeting of beneficiaries, that the help must go first and foremost to these vulnerable sections of the society.
We'll be back after this short break. Stay with us.
Big 3.
Welcome back. With Sri Lankan authorities have made significant progress towards formulating an economic reform program. The International Monetary Fund staff team visiting Sri Lanka said, concluding their visit for in-person bailout talks in Colombo. The IMF delegation said in a statement that discussions will continue virtually with a view to reaching a staff-level agreement on the extended fund facility arrangement in the near term.
On the 20th of June, an IMF delegation led by its chief of the Debt Capital Markets Division, Monetary and Capital Market Department, Peter Brewer, and senior economist of its Fiscal Affairs Department, Masahiro Nozaki, arrived in Sri Lanka for bailout talks with Sri Lankan authorities. During their visit, they held discussions with key officials of the Sri Lankan government, including Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, and Chairman of SLFP, former President Maithripala Sirisena. Upon conclusion of their 10-day visit, IMF's Peter Brewer and Masahiro Nozaki conveyed their preliminary findings in a joint statement today. The statement said that Sri Lanka, which is currently undergoing a severe economic crisis, is expected to see significant contraction in the economy in year 2022, while inflation is high and rising. They said that during the in-person visit, the IMF team witnessed some of the hardships currently faced by the Sri Lankan people, especially the poor and vulnerable who are affected disproportionately by the crisis. The IMF officials reaffirmed their commitment to support Sri Lanka at this difficult time in line with its policies. Brewer and Nozaki said the team had constructive and productive discussions with the Sri Lankan authorities on economic policies and reforms to be supported by an IMF extended fund facility arrangement, adding that the staff team and the authorities made significant progress on defining a macroeconomic and structural policy package. The discussions are expected to continue virtually with a view to reaching a staff-level agreement on the extended fund facility arrangement in the near term. They further said that IMF Executive Board approval would require adequate financing assurances from Sri Lanka's creditors that debt sustainability will be restored because public debt is assessed as unsustainable. In this context, discussions focused on designing a comprehensive economic program to correct the macroeconomic imbalances, restore a public debt sustainability, and realize Sri Lanka's growth potential. The IMF team also said that discussions advanced substantially during the mission, including on the need to reduce the elevated fiscal deficit while ensuring adequate protection for the poor and vulnerable. They said that far-reaching tax reforms are urgently needed to achieve the objective given the low level of revenues. Other challenges that need addressing include containing rising levels of inflation, addressing the severe balance of payments pressure, reducing corruption vulnerabilities, and embarking on growth-enhancing reforms. Finally, the IMF delegation said that Sri Lankan authorities made considerable progress in formulating the economic reform program and that the IMF is looking forward to continuing dialogue with Sri Lanka.
Now, the police has apprehended 653 inmates who escaped the Kandakadu Rehabilitation Centre on the night of Tuesday following a suspicious death of an inmate. Meanwhile, the autopsy of the deceased inmate was postponed due to the lack of clarity of his identity. A group of inmates at the Kandakadu Rehabilitation Centre had escaped following a suspicious death of an inmate on the 9th of June 28. The inmates were reported to exhibit unruly behaviours and had caused damages to the property within the premises. They had also acted violently towards the military personnel preceding their escape. 653 inmates who escaped have been apprehended by the police today. According to Commissioner General of Rehabilitation Major General Darshana Hettiarachchi, 72 more inmates are yet to be retrieved. Meanwhile, the post-mortem procedures of the deceased inmate was scheduled to be carried out in Polonnaruwa Hospital. However, it was postponed as the relatives who had been summoned were unable to identify the body of the deceased. According to Major General Darshana Hettiarachchi, investigations are being conducted to establish an accurate identity of the deceased individual. Reports say that the deceased is a former military person who had fled the army 9 years ago. His roommates at the rehabilitation centre are also reported to be involved in the identification of the deceased body. A Gazette notification was issued last night publishing the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution of Sri Lanka. The Cabinet of Ministers had approved the proposal to the Gazette earlier this week.
A Gazette notification was issued last night publishing the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution of Sri Lanka. The Cabinet of Ministers had approved the proposal to Gazette earlier this week. Minister of Justice Vijaydas Rajapaksa initially presented the 22nd Amendment Bill to the Cabinet on the 6th of June, calling for reduction of presidential powers. There had been a number of discussions around the new amendment since then. However, the Cabinet failed to establish a consensus. The new constitutional amendment is expected to empower the Parliament or Executive President, voiding the previously established 20th Amendment which granted unfettered power to President.
Now, Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe has been reappointed as the Governor of the Central Bank for Sri Lanka for another term of 6 years by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. Yesterday, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, in his capacity as Finance Minister, made his recommendation to the President to extend Dr. Veerasinghe's tenure as Governor of the Central Bank for a new term. The Prime Minister had reportedly informed President Gotabaya Rajapaksa in writing, recommending Dr. Veerasinghe for another term as Central Bank Chief. There had been uncertainty about whether Dr. Veerasinghe, who replaced former Governor Ajit Niwad Cabral in April, would be reappointed for a full 6-year term at the end of this month. However, the incumbent central bank governor had expressed his desire to continue in the position and serve a full 6-year term. A special Gazette notification has been issued by the Consumer Affairs Authority yesterday with new directives for commercial goods sales. Chairman of the Consumer Affairs Authority, Shantha Niriyala, announces a special Gazette notification with directives to label specific details on the end product of the commercial goods that are purchased by consumers. The Gazette requires all traders, manufacturers, store owners, importers, and distributors to display the maximum retail price, weight or volume, the date of manufacture and registered address, and contact number of the manufacturer, as well as other specifications on the items they intend to sell. The directives is to be effective from the 28th of July. Now the Sri Lanka stocks slipped today, ending the month in the red as negative sentiments in the market continued, while sharp increases in yields of treasury bills at the weekly auction also weighed on the appetite. The main all-share price index closed 0.32% lower at 7,342.33. The turnover was 735.4 million rupees, less than a quarter of this year's daily average turnover of 3.42 billion rupees. The more liquid S&P SL20 index fell 0.68% to 2,324.36. The market in the month of June has lost 93% after gaining 6% in May. It lost 23% in April, followed by 14.5% fall in March. Foreign purchases, meanwhile, amounted to 11.16 million rupees, while foreign sales were 8.8 million rupees. Now that's all from us here at First at 9. Have a very good night.